Thank you. Welcome, Senator Steiner and Mr. Gudman, to our COINversation. I'm going to be asking each of you separately several questions. We have a lot of questions tonight. And so to get it done within 20 minutes each, we try to ask you to focus your answers, and we'll do our best to get through them. So starting with, in alphabetical order, with Mr. Gudman, could you please introduce yourself to everyone and tell us why you're the candidate most qualified to be state treasurer?
You bet. And please call me Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I bring decades of experience, over 45 years in investing experience in treasury issues. I have a BA in economics from Pomona College, an MBA from the Wharton School, analyst, controller, treasurer in businesses, as well as treasurer or chair or vice chair in many volunteer organizations for the last several decades. I'm also very pleased to report just this last weekend, I received the endorsement from the Oregonian after Helen Young and Teresa Bottomley interviewed both of us. They came out and decided to give an endorsement to myself for treasurer. But I want to talk a moment about my values. I believe, and I still believe, that you cannot love Oregon and not love all Oregonians. And by loving and respecting them, you reach out a hand when they fall, you help heal them when they are sick, and you provide opportunity for them to be self-sufficient, so they'll be equal in fact and not just simply in theory. That the respect for and the dignity of every individual is of prime importance and a starting point for all conversations. Now, I've got the training and the experience and the know-how to run the state treasury, but more than that, I feel there's a responsibility to not simply be treasurer with the ongoing operations, but to create bigger tables, to elevate voices that have too long been left out of the insider politics game in Salem. I don't want to be there alone. I want to create ways that people with different backgrounds and lived experiences can meaningfully engage and help steer policy. It is about lifting people up. It's about diversification of views, a very basic investment concept which should be applied in the public policy making. That's a key part of my platform, and I have sold it here. You'll probably see me hold it up again, a copy of A Platform for Oregon's Financial Future. I encourage you to go to my website at www.jeffgudman.org and take a look at it in more detail. It has a variety of progressive policies as well as the details for their implementation. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, to meet all of you, and to answer your questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's talk about the Coal Act, which was a really important piece of legislation that passed in this year's session and will be something that you as state treasurer would administer. Tell us your view on divesting retirement funds, not only from the thermal coal that is specified under the act, but also fossil fuels.
Certainly. First and foremost, we need to collectively and continually decarbonize our economy, not just simply here in Oregon, but in the United States and throughout the world. Climate change is very real. Apologies. Climate change is very real. It's a shared value, and we have to be focusing on halting climate change and decarbonizing the economy. Now, our objective is to halt climate change, and divestment is a tool to help us get there. It's not just simply a goal on its own. We need to keep track of what's happening to equities and bonds throughout the investment portfolio and the policy after we've divested. Does it make an impact? Or would we have more influence banding together with different pension allies at the boardroom table? Now, I think it's going to be different for each investment, so we need to approach this with a scalpel and a hacksaw. And yes, divestment is clearly a tool in our arsenal, but it's also the opportunity to band together is another tool. And I think we want to have a treasurer who has the know-how and the experience to stand up to the investment advisors in New York, as well as the entrenched bureaucracy in Salem. Now, there's a recent example within the last couple of weeks in Australia, a company called Woodside Energy. They had a climate plan, and the pension funds in Australia and elsewhere banded together and said, your climate plan is not enough. You need to do more. That's exactly the kind of example that I want to bring forward, going and serving as Oregon's next treasurer. not only as we look at our own portfolio, but as we make efforts to make sure we're decarbonizing in Oregon and throughout the country.
Thank you. So I want to extend that same analysis to investments in rental housing, real estate conglomerates, and that sort of thing. In the last few years, Oregon has appropriated and spent millions of dollars to try to address our housing crisis. And yet the state treasury appears to be heavily invested in real estate conglomerates and other types of investments that have driven up the cost of residential rental and created the crisis that has made housing so unaffordable for so many. So what is your view on divesting from those kinds of investments?
Certainly. A very similar answer, but first of all, I want to thank you for bringing this topic up. Examples of what you're describing. We have $150 million of our public dollars in the Sculptor Real Estate Fund number 4. It's an opportunistic fund which is looking to buy senior housing and push investment returns up to 20%. By doing so for exactly what you've identified with creating the problems. We have another $200 million of our public dollars that were recently committed to the Nuveen U.S. Cities Multifamily Fund, which is a mouthful, but it's designed to find growing housing markets and expressly, quote, capitalize, unquote, on the housing demands of millennials. And an example of one of those holdings is the Matisse Apartments in Portland, acquired by that Nuveen U.S. Cities Multifamily Fund. And the state treasury's own report says explicitly that much of those multifamily asset strength is due to value from rising rents. Will I divest? I can't make that commitment explicitly without looking to the details of each fund. But we've got to explore policy options, working with the legislature to make multifamily flipping less attractive. No question, we've got a housing crisis, and the fact that we're financing both sides of it is not helpful. On the one hand, we've got significant investments in affordable housing and housing services. On the other hand, we've got significant investments in rental units and a tax structure that rewards unoccupied homes through the use of the mortgage interest deduction, as well as to land speculators. We need to fix this so it no longer makes sense to have these investments anymore because they won't pan out, and we're not working at cross purposes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been reported that you've switched parties. You only recently became a Democrat. Is that right?
That is correct.
So do you mind if I test your commitment to certain democratic values and let people see where you stand on those?
Of course. Please.
So I guess my first question would be, do you believe that Joe Biden was fairly elected in 2020?
Yes. Full stop, explanation point, more explanation point. And I would make an addition on that. You'll notice that, or I've noticed, that none of the Republicans claiming that there was a fraudulent election haven't applied that logic to their own races. So apparently the election was immaculate in their own district somehow, but election deniers know that their complaint's a scam. It's 100% scam. And that may be even more frightening, the fact that they know it's a scam, but they're going forward anyway. Joe Biden was fairly elected, period.
Thank you. Do you support a constitutional amendment in Oregon to protect reproductive freedoms that we have now?
Where do I sign up? Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Why did you switch parties?
You bet. Simply put, I grew up in Oregon where Republicans looked like Tom McCall or Mark Hatfield or Norma Paulus. And I never thought I need to worry about the type of vitriol, and it is vitriol, we've been seeing these days, even if it was out of step within that party. But obviously, the Republican Party of today is no longer a home for anyone with views like Tom McCall's or mine. And I think that our previous president was a slap I needed. It was to realize it was not going to be saved.
Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you.
So tell us your views on Oregon's mail-in voting system. Do you support any changes or restrictions on that?
You bet. Now, the mail-in system, the voting is not in the treasurer's office, but you've asked the question, and I'd like to let you know what I think. I think mail-in voting is great. We have a wonderful turnout, not quite as good as Minnesota, as was pointed out by Mr. Ellison last Saturday night at the Wayne Morse dinner. and I believe that more voters participating is a good thing. I really can't think of any restrictions I would want or think that are necessary. Our system here is among the most accountable and secure in the nation. With respect to increasing access to registration and voting, the Secretary's office and the legislature has done a great job of focusing on registration. I think I'd like to see county offices take a more active role in ensuring equitable access to drop sites. Even with the return ballots now being prepaid, many voters still opt to use a drop box for their sense of just personal security. And it's remarkable from what I've read that a surprising number of boxes are either not accessible 24/7 or difficult to access for disabled individuals or simply not in certain areas. One example of that is if you live in the Cully neighborhood in Portland, you have one drop box nearby that is not drive-up accessible. And if you live in Happy Valley, you've got two drive-up boxes in easy proximity with another 24/7 box outside the library. And it's important about drive-up boxes. Parents with small kids in the back seat may not be able to take the time to get out of their cars with kids and walk to the library to drop off ballots. So that makes the drop box that you can get to just simply by driving up and dropping it off so important.
Thank you. So going back to the job of state treasurer, can you comment on what many Oregonians see as a lack of transparency with the state investment portfolio, ostensibly because it is heavily invested in private equity funds that require holdings to be kept secret? And also, how can we have more public transparency so we know where our public originating dollars end up?
Certainly. I'll hold this up again. This is a specific element in my platform. I encourage you to take a look. While all relevant Oregon Investment Council OIC materials are made available online, the average Oregonian trying to track investment decisions has to pore through hundreds of pages of upload analysis and meeting information in order to glean the information about a single vote. Now, in contrast, the Legislative Assembly our Oregon legislature has a very transparent OLIS, the Oregon Legislative Information System website, that presents a crystal clear picture to the general public as what is queued up, what votes have been taken, and what determinations have been made. As treasurer, I will instruct the Treasury to develop and launch an online information tool, that allows Oregonians a clear view of what is occurring at the public OIC meetings. They are broadcast, but records of proposals, testimony, supporting documents, and perhaps most importantly, actual records easily obtained of the votes that the OIC makes to fund various commitments and policy items. And since the cost of this system can be borne by existing unused resources within the Treasurer's office, it won't require any additional appropriation from the legislature. There's a really good example of where we can aspire ourselves to. The Norwegian Sovereign Fund. That fund, which has been investing the monies that has come from oil in Norway, but they've laid out, and indeed the chief investment officer there has his own podcast where they're laying out exactly what they've got, and in particular where they have individual funds. When they get closed out, they'll lay out where all the dollars were. It's important to find the balance between the opportunity to have the best investment managers and their concern on having a certain level of privacy about it. But these are public dollars, and there's no reason why we can't be more transparent, particularly about the funds that have been closed out and where the dollars went.
Thank you. We seem to be less transparent than most states. So
yes,
appreciate that answer. I want to ask you about the land board, which you will be serving on as treasurer, along with the governor and the secretary of state. And the land board, of course, governs the policies for state-owned land, like the state forests. It would be important for whoever is elected state treasurer to be independent of the industries that extract resources from those state forests and other state lands. And could you comment on that?
Certainly. And again, thank you for the question. I've committed to not taking any contributions from oil and gas or timber companies. I think it's important that you know when I'm talking about oil and gas or climate change or timber that it is my voice you are hearing, not somebody else's talking points that may have been given to a person. Now, the first and last timber company contribution I received was $500 which in the scheme of things is not a lot, back in 2020. I also want to look beyond the Treasurer's Office for the land board assistants. In the past, both the Secretary of State, the Governor, and the Treasurer have somebody from inside their office serving as their assistant. I think we can look beyond that to other people, other bodies. Say, for example, somebody from the Oregon OLCV, and all the acronyms we have, but have somebody from the OLCV could be the land board assistant for the treasurer. I want to keep in mind that companies like Georgia Pacific or Weyerhaeuser, they're multi-billion dollars companies. And when they extract resources from the state, they also extract value. It's important to know what we're getting in return, because we can't afford to socialize their liabilities and privatize their profits.
Thank you. We just got a time for maybe one more question. So I wanted to ask you about what ideas you have, should you be elected state treasurer, for making sure all Oregonians benefit from our strong economy. We have Oregon Saves, that type of thing. What else would you suggest or recommend? And as a follow-up to that, I want to go ahead and ask, how would you prepare Oregon for a downturn in the economy?
Certainly. The state has done a very good job of preparing for downturns. They've set up a couple of different long-term funds that have been built up dollars over the years as a percentage of the budget. The challenge is, as the budget gets bigger, the dollars required to go into those sustainable funds get bigger all the time. And the legislature recently did good work on that to get more money into that. So we've done a good job of preparing. We can always do more. But also, to help to make sure to benefit from a strong economy and for the next downturn, is coming back to my platform and the kicker. I think there's an opportunity for the treasurer to lead the process, a difficult process nonetheless, but a process to say, kicker dollars, trying to go with 2% predictions of how much money we're going to get or kick it back, is an opportunity for us through the leadership of the treasurer's office to say, some of those dollars, based upon recommendations from a broad group of people, based on their lived experiences, to recommend projects that are called one-off projects. There's 180 cities in Oregon with 10,000 people or less. They can't afford on their own to replace water and sewer systems. Having some of the kicker dollars when the next kicker dollar rounds come, going to help them replace those water and sewer systems, helps in so many ways. It helps the local economy. It provides for clean water. It helps have sewer systems up to date, which in turn use less electricity, which puts less pressure on our transmission system. So very key element of my platform going forward is that, and we'll move forward on it.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Good evening, Senator Steiner.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
No, thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself to everyone on the call and tell us why you're the candidate most qualified to be state treasurer.
Sure. So I'm Elizabeth Steiner, and I'm a family physician by profession. So I'm really dedicated to helping Oregonians be as healthy as possible. And in fact, that's why I ran for the legislature. We'll talk about that in just a sec. I'm a working mom of 3 adult children, and I've been in the state legislature a little over 12 years now. Most recently, for the past 6 years, I've been the Senate co-chair of the Joint Committee on Ways and Means, the Budget Committee, and as such have had responsibility for managing the PERS agency and helping, or at least more accurately, overseeing their budget and helping make decisions about how our bonding capacity is used, and working closely with the treasurer on a variety of issues. So I mentioned that I ran for the Senate because I believe Oregon can be the healthiest state in the nation, and that's exactly why I'm running for treasurer. We know that financial insecurity is the leading cause of poor health, physical and emotional health in people. And I used to see this all the time in my patients in our practice. And the treasurer, whether it's through shepherding our pension fund and making sure that that grows and that we protect the benefits that our state employees have earned, or building out savings programs that help families save for their own future, for their retirement through Oregon Saves, or their children's future through 529 or college savings plans, these programs can make an enormous difference in the short and long-term financial well-being of families. So building out those programs in a whole host of ways, which we may or may not have time for me to describe, but I have plans for, will make an enormous difference in the long-term financial well-being of Oregonians across the entire state, and as such, will significantly improve both the physical and emotional well-being of Oregonians. My experience as Senate co-chair of the Budget Committee and working closely in the legislature, and my demonstrated track record of efficacy in getting big stuff done is why I'm best suited to be treasurer.
Thank you. Well, let's start with that. What are those ideas for making sure all Oregonians benefit from our economy?
So there are several different ways to look at that. The first is we have to make sure that we protect and build up our reserves. In my tenure as co-chair of the Joint Committee on Ways and Means, we have built our rainy day fund and our education stability fund up substantially, more than doubling the rainy day fund. And up until February, the cap on the rainy day fund was at 7.5% of general fund. I passed a bill in 2024 to raise that cap to 12.5% because 7.5% would not have been enough to get us through the big recession, the Great Recession in 2008-9. I had schools in my districts where there were 36 kids in a first grade classroom. If we had had that kind of reserves at that time, we wouldn't have seen that. We wouldn't have been laying off teachers, and our kids would have had a much better public education at the time. So I'm a big fan of building up state reserves, which will help protect Oregonians. Additionally, it's very important for more people to be aware that college savings plans are actually not just for college, but can in fact be used for almost any kind of post-secondary education. If you want to be a diesel mechanic and you need to buy tools and go to a community college where there's that specific program, and maybe you need to move to live closer to it, you can use a 529 plan for your tools and for your tuition and for your living expenses while you're attending community college to become a diesel mechanic. We need to be sure more people know about it. We also need to make sure that people take advantage of Oregon Saves, our statewide retirement program for people whose employers don't offer one. While the vast majority of eligible people are enrolled, most of them are saving the minimum amount. And we need to help them save a little bit more because we know that saving early through the magic of compound interest makes an enormous difference in the long-term economic well-being. Additionally, I'm already having lots of conversations about building out what's called the baby bond program, which would establish a savings account for every child born in this state. I'm already talking with funders. I've talked with the comptroller of New York and people from Maine, the treasurer and the managers from Maine who are managing their baby bond programs to understand how they're implementing it and how they've implemented it, how it's being funded. And I'm also talking to potential funders. Those are just a few of the ideas, and I'm happy to elaborate, but I also know you have other questions.
Thank you. We'll come back to it if time permits.
Sure.
Can you talk about the COAL Act, which was an important piece of legislation this past session, and tell us your views on extending that from divesting of thermal coal to fossil fuels?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm very proud of the fact that I was a chief sponsor of the COAL Act. I firmly believe that the COAL Act is exactly the right thing to do and reflects the kind of concrete steps that we can take in Oregon so that we're sure our investments match our values. Second of all, I'm 100% committed to implementing and, in fact, hopefully expediting implementation of the Treasurer's net zero plan. And that's going to include not only over time divesting from fossil fuels of all kinds, but also taking into consideration the scope 3 emissions, i.e. the emissions that are caused by companies that use fossil fuels, logistics companies, UPS or FedEx or whatever, as they move goods around, obviously create a lot of carbon emissions. And we need to take that into consideration as well. We have to think hard about the offsets too, so we can get to net zero as fast as possible. And part of that's going to be moving away from fossil fuels as fast as we possibly can, also taking into consideration our federal fiduciary responsibilities.
So you would commit to divesting the Public Employees Retirement Fund from fossil fuels on the same basis that the COAL Act requires?
I want to be clear. That is not what I said.
Okay, I just want to give you a chance.
I want to be clear. I am committed to divesting our fund from fossil fuels as fast as possible, given the fiduciary responsibilities. I have to first meet federal definitions. The treasurer first has to meet federal definitions of a fiduciary to protect the pension fund. Are fossil fuels going to be the best investment in the not too distant future? No, they're probably not. At which point, not only will it be the right thing to do to divest from them because of carbon, it will also be the right thing to do to divest from them because of the fiduciary obligations to protect the pension fund. So I will be taking into consideration both our values about getting to net zero fast and the legal requirement to protect the pension fund and make sure it grows.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I want to ask the same question with regard to investments in real estate conglomerates and other investments that have made residential rental housing so expensive and unaffordable for so many. You comment on divestment from that.
Yeah, so there are a couple of challenges here, and I don't disagree with much of what my counterpart said. What I would add is this. I think there are, first of all, enormous opportunities. You know, Vermont has a 10% for Vermont program where they invest 10% of the money that they're investing on behalf of the state inside Vermont. I don't know that we can do 10% yet. I do think that we could be investing more. And there's no reason that the state, as the pension fund, couldn't be investing in housing in Oregon in analogous ways, but without the profiteering that many of these real estate conglomerates are doing. One of the challenges, though, that I think we have to talk about a little bit, and I know we're going to get into this more when we get into the question of private equity and transparency, is that when we make investments in some of these private investments, and real estate is a private investment as opposed to a public equity, we don't always have the same level of control. We can and should do our due diligence to hold any entity that we're investing in accountable for how they treat their employees, for how they treat the people impacted by their investments. And I pledge as much as possible to using our power as a shareholder to do that. That being said, in some investments, as a limited partner, we have limited capacity to do that. I will be looking for every way I possibly can to engage and use our power as a shareholder, and also looking for ways to hold them accountable and pick specifically investments where they don't look to profiteer on the backs of millennials or other people who are just starting out and trying to build up their financial future.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's go ahead. Can you comment on what many Oregonians see as a lack of transparency with the state investment portfolio because of these private equity holdings? And how can we change that and increase transparency?
This is a really challenging problem, and I agree with you that it's a challenging problem. And I'll explain a couple of the reasons why. The first is that in order to meet that fiduciary responsibility that I talked about earlier, I'll never forget, in 2013, I was the Senate co-chair of the General Government Subcommittee of Ways and Means, and that's the subcommittee that oversees the PERS agency. And the then director came in and talked to us, and he said, look, in 1970, to achieve a 7.5% rate of return, we had to be about 75% in public equity and 25% in fixed income. Now it looks more like, and he put up this pie chart with about 17 kinds, I'm exaggerating slightly, 10 kinds of investments in various proportions. So it's much more complicated. I do not believe that even with the best managers in the world that we can get to the kinds of returns we need to keep our pension fund funded without some level of investment in private equity. And investment in private equity comes with restrictions, especially as what's called a limited partner, which is what Oregon is in these cases, where we are not allowed to disclose by virtue of the agreements that we sign when we invest in these companies. Now, are there ways to improve that transparency? There probably are, and I will certainly be looking for every way that I can to make sure that we follow the best practices. One of the things that I've been doing is engaging with treasurers around the country already. In fact, I attended a meeting of the National Association of State Treasurers in March, so I could start to learn from some of them and talk with them about this issue and look at what states have the best practices. This has been my practice as a physician. It's been my practice as a legislator. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We can learn from others who are doing it well. I've done this before as a physician, I've done it as a legislator, and I commit to doing it as a treasurer.
Thank you. So I want to ask you also about the land board, where the state treasurer would be serving to govern policies for state-owned lands, including state forests. And as I said earlier, it would be important, I think, for whoever's elected state treasurer to be independent of any industries, extract resources from state lands like timber. Would you comment on that?
Yeah. You know, as a legislator, I have a requirement to raise a lot of money. And partly that's for my own campaigns, and partly that's to help my colleagues so that we can maintain a strong Democratic majority in the legislature. And that's what I've done in my leadership role in the Senate for a long time. Over the course of my career, I have in fact received donations from timber companies. I haven't done the exact math, but I would venture to say that it's about 5% of the total donations that I've received from corporate interests. So it's there, but it's not a very large percentage. I made the decision when I entered the legislature that I would not take donations from tobacco companies, excuse me, or pharmaceutical companies. As a physician, it was very clear to me that I couldn't do that because those were areas where it was an obvious conflict of interest given my professional standards, right? And those were things where I knew that pharmaceutical companies, for example, were taking advantage of the system and gouging prices for people. Ultimately, the biggest issue is, do I demonstrate independence? And I'm going to give you an example of one of the clearest cases where I have. I have a very strong working relationship with the Hospital Association. They have given me, I would venture to guess, 5 times or 10 times as much money over the course of my career as the timber industry has had. And yet, I was the co-chief sponsor of the bill in 2021 to limit mergers and acquisitions in the healthcare systems between hospitals and medical practices, which the hospital system loathed. And you know what? I did it because it was the right thing for Oregonians, and I didn't care how much money the Hospital Association had given me. And they didn't care either because they gave me more money later because they know I'm a good legislator and I'm always going to be fair. The same is true as the treasurer. That's what I'm going to do. I'm always going to do what I've done as a physician, which is look at the evidence and make the best possible decision I can based on the best available evidence in front of me, not paying attention who gave me what money. And it's interesting, as an aside, that that Mr. Gudman said that he'd taken $500 from timber in 2020 because, in fact, he took $2,500 from Timber Unity in March of 2020, and then an additional almost $4,000 in in-kinds from Timber Unity in October of 2020 when he was running for treasurer. So while I'm glad that he's disavowed them now, I do think it's important to be honest about what we have or haven't done. And that stuff's publicly available. I can't make it up because it's in Orstar, right? And that's the advantage of our campaign finance system. It's publicly available. So I appreciate the concerns that you all have about timber, but I would say that my track record demonstrates that I vote based on the best available evidence and not based on who's given me money. I would also note that I'm the candidate who's been endorsed by the Oregon League of Conservation Voters.
Thank you. So Oregon passed a campaign finance reform bill this year toward the end of the session. Would you comment on that and what else you see could be done to limit the influence of money in our politics?
Sure. Well, the first thing we could do, if we could, is pass a federal constitutional amendment and get rid of Citizens United, because corporations are not people. I don't have a problem with limiting individual contributions, and I think the amounts that we passed in that bill for individuals are in line with the federal ones, and I think that seems reasonable. The good news in Oregon is that we have pretty good evidence that money doesn't buy elections. We know how much money, for example, Phil Knight put into elections in 2022, and we know how successful those candidates were. We know how much money the Bitcoin community, the cryptocurrency community, put into one of the candidates for Congressional District 6. That didn't get them very far either. So although I agree, though I agree that money doesn't really have a place in politics, I'm very proud of Oregonians that we see through that very clearly. So I voted for the campaign finance bill. I don't think we have, fortunately in Oregon, many candidates or elected officials whose votes can be bought. And I worry a little bit about transparency, because right now I have one PAC. After this bill takes effect, I could have 2 or possibly 3 different kinds of PACs. And you would have to know not only Friends of Elizabeth Steiner, but maybe I have a PAC called Friends of Candidates Who Like Puppies, right? But you'd have to know that, and you'd have to know who was behind Friends of Candidates Who Like Puppies, and you'd have to be able to find it to figure out who's giving that PAC money, and then figure out where that money's going out again, right? So I worry about transparency. One of the things I love about our campaign system right now is that it's remarkably transparent. You can argue the lag times are a little long sometimes, but you can go into Orstar and see exactly who's given me exactly how much money and where I've spent it over my entire legislative career. So I think that's a good thing. The last thing I would say is this. Even if we limit donations, that won't change the cost of running campaigns. What it will mean is that candidates will have to spend a lot more time raising money and a lot less time having real, genuine conversations with voters like we're having tonight. And I worry about that too, because I know how much time my colleagues who are running for Congress or in Congress spend fundraising, and it's not nearly as much time as I have to spend right now. And they get to spend as much time as I do having these conversations. So generally speaking, get money out of politics? Yes. Is this the perfect situation? I don't know yet. I think we're going to have to watch closely and see.
Okay. Our time is almost up. I just want to give you a chance to say anything else you'd like us to know.
Sure.
Next month.
You know, I'm glad that Mr. Gudman has joined us in the Democratic Party. I think it's a great place to be. I recognize that he felt a little slapped in the face, as I think all of us did, by the horrors of Mr. Trump's presidency. I'm a little puzzled as to why he chose to run again as a Republican in 2020 after all that, but that's for him to answer. What I would say is that I'm a lifelong Democrat, that I've been working publicly in the public interest for many, many years, both as a family physician and as an advocate on behalf of ensuring that Oregonians get access to high quality, affordable health care. And now for over 12 years in the legislature, enacting the values that I think we all share. And that's exactly the kinds of values and the kind of track record of efficacy and commitment to principles that I would bring to being your treasurer. I have confidence that I have the experience and the expertise to do this, and that I understand how to build the relationships and the teams to get all the information I need. As a family physician, I'm used to assembling teams of experts to make sure that I understand everything as well as possible. I don't have to be an expert in everything. The treasurer, nobody has to be an expert in everything. What we do have to do is be humble about what we know and what we don't know, and be prepared to learn. I am a lifelong learner, and that's exactly what I would do as your treasurer. So my commitment to helping Oregonians be healthy in every sense of the word is evident and longstanding, and has been demonstrated during my entire time in public office. It would be a privilege to serve as your treasurer, and I hope I'll have that opportunity. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Senator. Don't leave. I'm going to give Jeff a chance to respond to some of the things you said, and then I'll give you a chance, just a minute or so each, to kind of wrap up and make any responses to anything the other one has said. Jeff?
Get myself unmuted.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm not running a traditional campaign where candidates come through and drop their talking points and endorsements and call it a day. I've shared my platform. And I think we ought to take a look at some things here. The Oregon workers don't need a treasurer who claims to want to protect their retirement, but has voted twice to slash it, even after the first time it was declared illegal. We don't need that. We need a treasurer who's going to be standing up for working families and not put their head in the sand until election season rolls around. I'm pleased that Senator Steiner attended the state treasurer's meeting, but we've yet to see her ever since the announcement came out of her candidacy last year at an Oregon Investment Council meeting. They've met 6 times since then. Haven't been there. 2 of the times during the legislative session, that's understandable, hasn't been showing up. Secondly, Senator Steiner at our recent meeting and conversation at the City Club talked about tolls. And the answer was effectively, they have them back east where I started out in my life. You'll get used to it. I've laid forward a specific plan about not having to use tolls on the freeways to help pay for the transportation system that we need, because tolls are going to harm those that can least afford it the most, given the shift workers can't avoid congestion pricing. Lower paid workers are likely to live farther from their workplace.
Jeff,
we don't have to
I don't
get
mean
used to it.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
I'll stop.
No, that's okay. I wanted to ask you, though, if you wanted to respond to the discussion about the Timber Unity contributions that you have received.
On the Timber Unity, I haven't looked at I remember the $500. I didn't remember the other ones. Yes, I didn't ask for it, but it came to me. So yes, the response is yes, I got it. It didn't make a difference in what I think about things. But yes, it came in. If it's there on the website that has all the dollars, which is a good thing, listing out both in kind and actual dollar contributions.
Okay, thank you, Senator Steiner. Would you like to respond to anything? Just
sure.
We just have about a minute.
Yep, really quickly.
Jeff just said.
You know, Jeff's right. I did vote in favor of 2 bills to make some changes to our public employee retirement system. And I did that because one of the things I've learned in my entire life, professional life, and certainly as a legislator, is that you often have to choose between 2 good things. In 2019, getting some changes to the PERS system was what we needed to do in order to pass the Student Success Act, which resulted in over $2 billion more biennium for early learning and K-12 education. I thought that was a reasonable trade-off. And I would point out that I'm a tier 2 beneficiary too. So I was cutting my own pension and that of my then husband and that of many, many of my friends. So I was putting my own money where my mouth was, and I was trying to protect our school children and improve their education. I'd do it again. I don't think there are other changes to be made. Second of all, you know, it's hard. I don't like being blunt like this, but not only did Jeff accept those donations, he spoke against cap and trade at a Timber Unity rally in 2020. And if he says, well, those donations didn't affect my perspective, then why is it such a big deal that you won't accept donations from fossil fuels or timber companies now? So I'm a little puzzled because that seems incongruent. But the long and the short of it is, I'm the one who has the track record of actually working. Have I been to OIC meetings? No, I have a full-time job. And so I haven't, and that's okay, because that's not my job right now. And my job right now is to be a legislator, to be in charge of the budget committee, and to continue that work, and to get out and meet people across the state as a candidate for treasurer. And I'm not sorry for missing those meetings, because I can learn all I want and I watch them at other times. Just because I don't actually go doesn't mean I don't watch them. So I think that that's one of the joys of asynchronous learning at this point. So fundamentally,
so I think
I've been walking the walk.
I think we're going to conclude this now, and want to thank both of you for what turned out to be a more spirited debate than we had envisioned. And we appreciate that, because it tells us a lot more about both of you and gives us a chance to see you in action. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.